Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about Susan Pam-Grant's play Curl Up and Die, which is a South African play. So it's not an overtly anti-apartheid play, unlike most of the other plays in this collection at least. But it is, I would argue, still an anti-apartheid play. Just it approaches it in an indirect way. So the play is set in a hair salon called Curl Up and Die International, DYE. It's owned by Rolene, who's white, and her assistant is Miriam, who's black. So immediately we know that there are going to be racial issues here. And actually a lot of the discussions in the play, especially between Rolene and Mrs. Dubois, who's also white, are about how the neighborhood is declining, or their previous neighborhoods they lived in declined, whatever it is, as black South Africans were allowed to move in. So there's definitely a racial component here. But what I think is really interesting and really important is that the critique of the play is not a simplistic, oh, racism is bad one, although it is. The critique, as I see it in this play, is that all of these women's lives are made worse by poverty, by inequality, by distrust, by criminality, by ineffective policing, by patriarchal hierarchies, etc., etc. And yet, they can't. The facts of racial politics in South Africa prevents these black and white women from forming solidarities. So that, I think, is the critique. It's not the critique that Pam-Grant is making is not necessarily a simplistic critique of racism. It's identifying a problem that decreases the quality of life for both black and white South Africans, as well as South Africans of other races, people of South Asian or Indian descent, people of East Asian descent, etc., who were sizable minorities in apartheid South Africa. But the politics of race end up dividing groups who should have solidarity. So we get this component of racism and fear, anxiety, this sense that this is a neighborhood on the decline pretty much right from the beginning. Because Rolene arrives at her shop, she's locked out. Miriam, I guess, has the key, even though she's the assistant, which I'm not fully clear on why that is. But Rolene shows up, she's locked out, trying to get into the shop. Mrs. Dubois shows up, and she yells back. She's a caretaker kind of thing. Like I'm not exactly clear on what the job is. It seems like sort of head of a homeowners association or something like that for her neighborhood. But it's a gated community, and she's sort of in charge of upkeep and things like this. That becomes significant later on, and I'll talk about that later. She shouts back to somebody in the gated community, "Close the security gates, man. What do you think we put them up for security? You got to keep them closed. I don't know how many times I got to tell you that." So, I mean, and this is the second thing we hear in the play. The first thing is Rolene showing up and trying to get Miriam, who hasn't arrived yet, to open the door. So immediately we're confronted with this sense of threat, this sense of danger, and the anxiety that these characters feel about that sense of danger. within the first few lines of their conversation, Rolene and Mrs. Dubois sort of emphasize this, and they clearly tie it to race. So Rolene says, "So here I sit like a bloody magu." I don't know what that is. That's a South African thing, I guess. Mogu, Moegoe. Waiting to get into my own hairdresser's. And you know what? I'm even lucky to be alive. I was nearly trampled there in the street. Miss Dubois says, "By what?" Rolene says, "One of those bloody black taxis. I must now walk in the road because all these blacks is sitting with their furniture and things outside Bel Air Mansions, taking up the pavement space. And that road is busy, hey? I mean, why must they sit in the pavement? Hag, they got no shame." And Mrs. Dubois says, "It will still take 1,000 years to still educate that bunch." So, right from the beginning, no question that we're going to be getting a thick layer of racism in this play. And we do get that throughout. I mean, Rolene and Mrs. Dubois continually talk about criminality, poverty, even more sort of banal things like different cooking techniques and smells and things like this. And they continually link the decline of property values and the decline of or the increase of poverty, increase of criminality, etc., to the presence of black people. The problem with this theory is that we also get a substantial amount of information suggesting that this neighborhood, as well as other neighborhoods that, say, Rolene has lived in, suffered from poverty prior to black South Africans starting to move in. And so actually these issues are not divided along race lines. The impression that we get is that, in fact, they are across the board problems for South Africans because of poverty, because of inequality, because of lack of opportunities, etc., etc. And this becomes especially apparent toward the end. So Mrs. Dubois actually at some point basically says her goal is to keep her neighborhood white, and she tries to avoid saying that she wants to keep her neighborhood white, because there's another character, Dudu, who's black, and she's a sort of, I don't want to say yuppie because that has negative connotations, but she's a professional, she makes a good salary, she lives in a good neighborhood. She actually, as they find out, lives in the apartment immediately below Rolene's apartment. So, I mean, she's by most standards of material prosperity, she's doing quite well. So Mrs. Dubois says she's trying to get Rolene to move into a flat in her neighborhood. And she says, okay, they're not, and talking about the people that live there, she says, okay, they're not exactly your best type, but then we can't exactly be picky and choosy either. My main thing is to keep the block pure. You know what I mean? The rot must stop. In my block, the guarantee is me, and I stick to my guns. And Dudu says, pure? You mean white, so why don't you just say it? And so this leads to a pretty substantial row about racial politics in South Africa, and Mrs. Dubois' very overt racism. So we've got that element of it. But we also find out, in especially dramatic, concentrated form at the end of the play, that poverty and violence and things like this are problems across the board. Rolene's friend Charmaine comes in and she's in a sort of drug-induced haze. And we find out that not only is she a drug addict, but she's a prostitute, and she's miserable. I mean, she's having this existential crisis because she can't get any help. She had applied for help from the government to try and get into a rehab program, and they turned her down and things like this. And she talks about the dangers of prostitution, and no one, even though there's 4 other people in this hair salon, no one seems to be listening to her. No one seems to sympathize or to even hear this horrific story she's telling about her lifestyle. Miriam becomes increasingly aware and increasingly vocal about the fact that she does a tremendous amount of work at this hair salon, and she hasn't gotten a raise in the 20 years that she's worked there. She confronts them directly with her poverty and with the challenges she faces. She says, "It's always Miriam, Miriam, Miriam. You don't think of me. Now you listen to me once. I'm in troubles. My husband is dying. I got 3 children in school. I got no food. I've got nothing, and you don't want to give me increase. I'm 20 years here, and I'm working like a slave. I'm helping you here with everything. I'm cleaning, but you don't even want to say thanks, because you don't like me. You just like my hands. Do you think I'm stupid? I'm not stupid. You found me here, and I teach you everything you know. You didn't know nothing. I can leave this job at any time, at any moment. Then you'll call Miriam, where's this? Miriam, where's that? Because you can't do nothing without Miriam. This job, it's not good, not even for a dog. So you and your Mrs. Du Bois and your pure white flats can all go to hell, the lot of you." So again, we have these cultures of poverty that affect the black characters and the white characters, and out of that could grow a source of solidarity. And the only time we really get a hint that there might be some kind of solidarity is when Dudu realizes that she lives immediately below Rolene's apartment. And Dudu had told them earlier about the apartment block she lives in, and she had mentioned that the woman in the apartment above her, that Dudu can hear every night her husband beating this woman in the apartment above her. And so when Dudu realizes that Rolene is the woman in the apartment above her, she realizes that Rolene is a consistent victim of domestic abuse. Pretty substantial domestic abuse. And Rolene knows this as well. Like, she's talked about this earlier in the play, how brutal her husband is to her. And this gives us the only real moment we have in the play where these women start to form a transracial solidarity, because Dudu and Miriam start trying to convince Rolene that she needs to leave her husband. They start trying to convince her that she has other options, she can go elsewhere, and that she deserves not to be a victim of domestic abuse. And it does seem like Rolene is considering it. Like Rolene is genuinely moving toward accepting this sympathy from these other women. And then Mrs. Dubois jumps in. And basically she says, and she's been a customer for a long time, so that's worth noting, but basically she says, either you choose to stick with me and the white race, or you stick with these black women. Either I stop being a customer here, or they stop being a customer in Dudu's case and working here in Miriam's case. And that moment of potential solidarity evaporates in the face of racism.